You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Super excited to talk to this week's guest. Just an incredible story and an incredible individual. Before we get to that, we've got some housekeeping to do and want to keep you guys in the loop on everything that's going on. Go to our website, hazardground.com, and continue to give us guest suggestions. We get a lot of these guys, and we're actually surprised at how many we're getting because we didn't know that people wanted to tell their story so badly, but we love that you guys want to. So go to our website, shoot us an email, and let us know if you've got a great story to tell or know somebody with a great story to tell. Don't forget about our partnership with Amazon. You go to our website, hazardground.com, once again, and when you guys go do your normal Amazon shopping, they'll send us a portion of what you spend, and we can help donate that to veterans and veterans organizations. So make sure you keep going to hazardground.com to do all your Amazon shopping. And we want to give a special shout out to a listener, Bobby, who goes by @CluelessComedy3 on Twitter. Bobby recently donated to the podcast. Actually, our first donation in the almost 2 years we've been doing this. But Bobby's an aspiring historian and a longtime listener and fan of the show. But more than just donating to the show, he wants people to remember to simply thank a vet or active duty service member for their service to America and our country. So we thank you, Bobby, for your donation and your request. And we also thank you for listening and supporting the show and supporting service members all over the world. Also wanted to thank those who are taking the time to listen and comment on YouTube. That feedback is always appreciated. Keep the comments coming. We read every single one of them and try to respond as fast as we can. So thanks for those. Don't forget to leave a rating and a review on iTunes as well. Those ratings help us out, grow the popularity of the show. And of course, follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All that out of the way. Super excited for this week's episode. Joining us this week is a former Marine sergeant who spent 8 years in the Marine Corps, multiple deployments to Afghanistan. After his military career ended, he ended up becoming an award-winning journalist. He is currently a writer for Newsweek covering the Department of Defense, but you have seen his work featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Task and Purpose, among other outlets all across America. You can also see some of his work on the critically acclaimed NBC series This Is Us. And finally, he may be one of the few Marines who's actually banned from a Marine Corps base. We'll get into that. And I'm very excited to introduce James LaPorta on the Hazard Ground Podcast. James, welcome, man. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay. You and I actually came across paths on Twitter, and social media obviously is a great tool, but just reading some of your work and stumbling across it, I'm like, well, not only is this guy a kick-ass writer, but holy crap, he's a vet. And so I'd love to hear how your story ended up, because you're one of the more famous people covering the military and everything that's going on. Given the climate of where we are, this should be a very riveting discussion. But start back at the beginning for me, James. How and why did you join the Marine Corps?
Sure. So I joined the Marine Corps 10 days after I graduated high school in 2006. I originally had planned to go into the Navy. I wanted to be a corpsman. But a Marine gunnery sergeant who I'm still friends with, who was taught like a junior ROTC, sort of got a hold of me and was like, why don't go in the Navy, go in the Marine Corps, and started talking to me about, what it was like to be a Marine and all that kind of stuff. And so I switched and went into the Marine Corps. And went into the infantry. And, at that time I was sort of, like every sort of 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid, the country's at war, it's only, this is 4 or 5 years after 9/11, so, 9/11 is still, impactful. And
right.
The effects of 9/11 are still impactful. Iraq's popping off, and, Fallujah had been fought in 2004 and Ramadi in 2005. And, it was one of those, I was not ready to go off to college because I was not a good student in high school. I was just trying to get to graduation and get on with life is sort of how I viewed my high school experience. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go to the military because, I figured college was just like high school, and I'm pretty much over sort of getting my education. So, I went right into the infantry, to go, go overseas and fight in the war, and that's before I knew, I didn't know anything about the world or just, if you asked me one question about Iraq, I couldn't even tell you anything about it. I just knew that the country was war and I needed to fight. So that was sort of my mindset at the time.
What did your parents say?
So my dad, my mom and dad are two very different people. My mom is from Macon, Georgia, and my dad is from Northern California. So they're very different personalities.
I would say so.
My dad, he wanted the college route. He wanted me to go to college, and was trying to talk me into, telling me, my mom and my dad are blue collar people. My dad was a lifelong truck driver. My mom worked at McDonald's. So I grew up very impoverished, sort of a family that lives paycheck to paycheck, and sort of, which bill can we decide to pay on this month? So no savings, that sort of thing. So I grew up sort of poor. And that's why sort of my dad wanted to push college, in terms of sort of wanting me to have sort of that better life, but I don't think the thing that he didn't realize was, again, I was not a strong student in high school, so I didn't really have money to go to college. So, and then my mother was like supportive, like all mothers, they're supportive of whatever their kid wants to do, so,
well, plus your mom has a military base within 30 miles of wherever she is in Georgia. I mean,
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Fort Benning. Yeah.
Pick and choose, whichever one. Benning, Stewart, Ord, Gillum, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is, I don't think I've ever said this, ever, to anybody. My grandfather, was a World War II veteran, so he fought at D-Day, and then he fought during the Battle of the Bulge in the Army.
Wow.
But my father, during Vietnam, was a draft dodger.
Really?
Yeah, it was. And I now, I'm skip ahead, but now that I've been to war and I understand a hell of a lot about the Vietnam War.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I used to wrestle with that. I used to wrestle with that a lot, especially when I was thinking about first going in the military. How could you do? And again, a kid who doesn't know anything about Iraq, I knew even less about Vietnam. But I used to wrestle with that. Like, how could you, your country's at war. Why wouldn't you go off to fight? And I just didn't realize what the Vietnam War was and the politics around that and stuff like that. And my dad basically said, look, I didn't want to kill people that I didn't think we should have been there killing, and that's what it came down to for him. He's like, he said, if it was like a war like my father, I would have gone off to that war. Like, speaking about World War II, he's like, but Vietnam was not like that.
That's amazing.
And so, but I didn't understand it as an 18-year-old kid.
No, but what's funny? When we hear about, and obviously you're covering elections as we're sitting here in, October 19th and recording this, but, we hear so much about draft dodger, and we heard it all the way back to Bill Clinton when you and I were younger. Oh, he's a draft dodger.
Right.
And it was such a big deal for the public. And then you go to combat and you're like, shit, I would have done the same thing. Like, who wants to do this? Like, this is not glorious. I know we have a romantic nature of war, and when you write about it and you read about it and you see it in movies, there is a certain romanticism that tugs at the heartstrings of patriotism and Americana and all the other stuff. But it's no joke. War is hell. And anybody who ran from it, I don't blame them. This isn't for everybody. It's not for the weak-willed or the faint of heart. This will literally tear you up inside.
Yeah. And I've actually never told anybody that my dad was a
well. Thank you for sharing.
But it's very truthful. But again, it's like I didn't understand at the time. But once I went to war, and and even more so now, I've studied. And we'll get into this, but I, as an Afghanistan veteran, I feel more of a kinship with a Vietnam veteran than I do even an Iraq veteran.
Interesting.
But that comes after just really studying sort of what occurred both on the military side and the political side of the house.
All right, now it makes sense.
With the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And geez, the guys who fought in Iraq, like, I can only imagine. Like, it was interesting. I've talked to Iraq vets. they're like, oh, you're in Afghanistan. I couldn't imagine fighting there. And I'm like, I can't imagine fighting, house to house, street to street.
I mean, Afghanistan and Iraq are completely different environments. Having been in both, although my combat time was in Iraq, sometimes there are some days I felt like Afghanistan would have been easier, but in other ways I felt like Iraq was more traditional combat. If you can, like, I guess the variables were less in Iraq. I think we were better trained for Iraq. I think we were better equipped for Iraq than we were Afghanistan.
Yeah, well, you in some ways may be right, because I mean the focus was on military operations in urban terrain. It was very much on working in those sort of. I mean that's where sort of the first idea of nation building came about. As where Afghanistan, it's sort of it's decentralized, even in from region to region. And from village to village, so it's those sort of nation building tools don't exactly translate that well into Afghanistan, and they didn't translate well into Iraq either.
Well, it's hard to nation build where there are two neighbors who live less than a mile apart and never see each other through the course of their lives because the terrain is so unmanageable. Like, there's not a movie or a picture that does Afghanistan's terrain justice unless you walk the ground and walk through it. And you basically sit in the bottom of a valley and look around you and see the highest mountains you could ever envision and go, holy crap, like, where the hell am I? Like, how does this structure exist on Earth? There's nothing that does it justice unless you're there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, we'll get into that, but where we filmed for This Is Us is the same set where they filmed American Sniper. And I remember when I got on set, I was like, wow, it's, even though it was supposed to look like, there's a part of the set that looks like Afghanistan, and then there's another part that looks like Iraq. I was like, wow, everything's too clean.
Right. Yeah.
That was the first thing that stood out. I was like, wow, there's not enough trash in the streets. I was like, I was talking to people. I was like, hey, can we get more trash in the streets? They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, literally just trash everywhere. But
makes sense.
But
yeah.
Anyways, to sort of bring this back on track, so my mom wanted me to, my mom was supportive of me going to the military. My dad was, my dad, again, like any father, he's worried about his son,
Sure,
so I went into the infantry. My first, went through 3 months of boot camp, and then what is it, like 2 months of the School of Infantry, and then went on to my first company was Lima Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines. And so we were doing I was in amphibious assault. We worked with like AAVs, so amphibious assault vehicles, and so we were sort of getting preparing to go on a 22nd MEU in like 2007. I didn't make that deployment. Just before we were set to deploy. I went on ship. I was on the USS Ponce and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't make the deployment. I broke my. A couple of buddies were like messing around in the barracks, and I tripped over my ruck sack.
Is that what we're calling it? Tripped over your ruck? Is that where actually? Did it actually happen?
Well, this actually happened.
Okay.
There was plenty of hazing when I first joined the unit. I like I said, my senior Marines, they had just gotten back from my Ramadi. They did not have a good time.
No.
Lost Ramadi 05.
Yeah, I was in Iraq at the time.
Yeah, so so here I am, and I didn't realize it till later on, but I was the new guy replacing a guy that was no longer there. That's how I look at it now. So even though what their hazing was absolutely wrong, I understand it. They were, a bunch of new Marines showing up replacing their friends.
Yeah.
It's no different than the stories we hear at World War II where, a new crop of soldiers would show up and sort of the veterans of D-Day didn't really want to get to know them. One, because they hated seeing them killed, but two, it's like it was a reminder that they were replacing someone, someone who was no longer there. But yeah, when I first got the unit, we got hazed pretty good. I got like 9 stitches under my left eye.
Oh wow!
I wasn't doing pull-ups, or I wasn't doing push-ups right, and a busted down private kicked me in the face.
That's very A Few Good Men-ish.
Yeah. It was very,
You were Private Willie Santiago, weren't you?
Yeah, a little bit, a little bit. I mean, I was, you know, well, yeah, I wasn't a strong runner, but but no, it was very much that they were, heavy drinking, and just sort of they really needed at this time in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps had not yet picked up on the idea that we need to get these guys help, and there was
Yeah.
still it was still heavily that, and there was still heavily that stigma of you don't go to therapy. If you go to therapy, you are seen as weak. It is, you're becoming a burden on your command. You're taking, in the infantry, it's always, well, if you go to therapy, you're taking a gun out of the fight. And that it's always put into those sort of perspective is like, well, if we lose you, that's one less gun that we have.
Yeah, and the PTSD thing. Even today, you talk about the stigma, and I've been open on other episodes before, and even I've admitted. I mean, I listen. I don't know if I have PTSD. I've never bothered to go get actually diagnosed. A lot of the symptoms and things that are telltale symptoms of PTSD I exhibit, but. Part of it is I don't go, one, because I don't want to go through the VA process. I've been through it once. I don't need it again. It's too much of a headache. But two, part of me just doesn't want to feel broken. Like I don't want to feel like it's not even, because at this point in my military career, I'm still in, I've hit 20 years. I'm in the National Guard still serving and because I love it and I still want to do it. But I'm not even worried about them sitting there telling me you have to retire because it's in the Guard. Like you can live in the Guard forever. It is what it is. But I just don't want to feel broken. I don't want to feel like there's something wrong with me. And I'm afraid to almost go get that diagnosis. And because nothing has happened to me that has manifested itself in a danger to anybody near me, my family, my children, or anything like that, I feel like I have it under control. But the idea of it's not. Stigma's not even the right word, James. It's just broken. It makes me feel like I'm less of a soldier. Does that make sense?
Yes, I feel the exact same way. I don't mind if other people go and get help.
I want other people to get help. Yeah.
I felt that. I consider myself very fortunate. I never had. I mean, absolutely, I've had triggers. Absolutely, I've had. There's been moments where I've had
major flashbacks.
A little bit of an anxiety attack. But I consider myself very fortunate. I never had any issues sleeping. I never had any issues with, a lot of the other symptoms that I see. I've never, I've experienced that sort of, where you walk into a building and you're on high alert and you got to sit at the seat that's, your back is to the wall. And so you can
always see the exit point, find out every point of egress and entry.
Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. I've had that. Yeah. But I know guys who are really struggling, and so I always felt, and not all veterans do this because, the one thing that is not talked about, there are people in our community that do go and say things that
malinger
to get the VA award money.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, and the other thing too is the resources are so limited. I don't want to take them away from somebody who needs more help than me.
Correct. And that's how I've always felt. I felt that if I went and said, and I was always told this, go and say X, Y, and Z, and that will get you up to the next sort of rating in the VA. And I always felt, I was like, but that's wrong because none of those things are happening to me. Like, I'm not having trouble sleeping. I'm not having, absolutely I have issues, but I'm in therapy. I go to the vet center every week. I still go to the vet center.
That's awesome.
And so I go every week. And so that's what I need. I don't need this other thing. So I'm not going to go in and say X, Y, and Z just to get compensation for it because I've always felt, and even though it's ridiculous, I've always felt it's like I'm taking from someone else.
Yeah, no, that's
and I can't morally live with myself, because I know I'd be living a lie.
I mean, 100%. I feel exactly the same way. All right, let's get back to how this all came about. So when do you get to your first deployment?
So I break my hand at Lima Company, and so I actually went. I got what is it called? Fleet Assistance Program. So I got FAP'd out to. I actually went back to the School of Infantry, and so I trained. I helped train students who were fresh out of boot camp and going into the infantry community. So I worked at Infantry Training Battalion. So I worked as I was a company police sergeant, but I also the instructors would let me help teach. So that was pretty cool, just to keep my own skills up as I, my hand healed and all that kind of stuff, and it was really rewarding. And so I really enjoyed. That's where I sort of first fell in love with the idea of teaching and teaching others. I know a lot of soldiers that, it almost becomes like, it's like their calling in life, that they get to teach others how to do something, in the military. And that's where I sort of first fell in love with that. But so I get out of School of Infantry around, it was like '08 time frame, and I go up to 2nd Marine Regiment, and this is all at Camp Lejeune. And I was with a mobile training unit, so we'd go around and teach other units, how to do combat reports, how to do things like that. And I heard that 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines was about to go on a deployment to Afghanistan. So there was these rumors that, so at this time frame, President Obama is coming to office, George W. Bush has left, and there's talk of a surge, and 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines in 2009 was nowhere near TO. I mean, they really needed guys. They were hurting. You didn't have 13-man squads. In some cases you had 6-man squads. So they came over to 2nd Regiment and said, hey, does anyone want to go to Afghanistan? And I was like, yeah, I'll go. And so I went. So I volunteered. I did none of the workup for Afghanistan. I literally I was like, yeah, I'll go. And it was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and we deployed. So I did no workup for Afghanistan, no cultural training, nothing. I just went. You
didn't need the cultural training anyway.
Yeah, it was. I did some of my own. I bought a Quran. And I started sort of reading through it. I bought. I read up on Pashtu Wali to try to get a sense of who the people were.
Right.
So I was doing my own sort of research. But so first deployment, we head over to Afghanistan in 2009. At that point, the whole idea is the idea of a surge had happened in Iraq, and so they're applying that same sort of idea to Afghanistan. And so I was a part of President Obama's sort of surge into southern Helmand province. So the British had only gone so far in Helmand province, and so we were basically going to leapfrog over them. And at the time, which was pretty cool, we conducted the largest helo insertion since Vietnam, and it was the first time we had taken that many dogs into war since some other battle. I can't remember which battle it was, but so July 2nd, 2009 is when Operation Kanjari kicked off, which is I think it translates to like strike of the sword. And so basically the idea was what was happening was the Taliban was running drugs and guns through what's called the Baram Shah, which is way south in Afghanistan. It's a connecting file between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And so they would bring it up through Helmand, and then it would go north and then disperse out into different provinces. So our idea was to sort of cut off those supply chains, and sort of to cut off their sort of lines of communication between their forces in the south and their forces in the north. So July 2nd pops off. Oh boy, I've written about this day. I wrote about a buddy of mine after I got out of the military, and I started sort of writing. One of my first articles, I wrote an article for the Washington Post, and it was about a guy that I had served with who he'd gotten out and taken his own life. So I was writing about him, but we were in the same battle. And so I had this very vivid depiction of everything that was happening, and I was taking pictures like crazy just to sort of document everything. July 2nd, 2009, sort of, it's interesting. Everything that I've gone through over the past 10 years, I can tie to everything that started on that day.
Wow.
We're getting on, what was it, 46s, 47s, these, when we're going in, so we're going down there. You got to, this. It's the mood on the helicopter is everybody sort of looking at each other in their eyes, and everybody is just nervous. So there was no base where we were going. There was no base of anything. So our backpacks were just loaded down with just all kinds of. I mean, I had a mortar round in my backpack. I wasn't a mortarman. I had 7.62. I had 5.56. I had grenades. I had. I had to have. Everybody had to have two guys help them put their backpacks on. I mean, that's just how loaded down with gear that we had. That we couldn't even put our backpacks on ourselves. That two guys had to help us. And then it was the idea was, as soon as the helo lands, everybody's going to jump up and run out of the helicopter. And since we don't have anything, everybody had to carry two cases of water. So the idea was you get off the helo, drop the water, drop your backpack, and just get in the 360 and get ready to fight.
I'm trying to envision this. This seems very cumbersome.
It was horrible.
It doesn't make the idea of a Marine and his rifle being supplanted by a Marine and a case of water seems a little bit odd.
Oh yeah, it was yeah. So basically, when I ran off the helo, I didn't even have a hand on my gun. It was just sort of swinging and hitting me in the knees.
Okay.
So that was basically the idea. You get off the helo, you drop these two cases of water, you drop your backpack, and you get into the 360 and you fight. That was the idea because we were expecting a fight.
When you say expecting a fight, now I'm having this vision. Well, I'm having this vision of you all dropping your stuff, dropping your marks, getting into 360, and all you hear is crickets. And there's nothing going on.
That's exactly what happened.
Okay, yeah.
So we get off the helo, and by the way, the helos, they landed in, oh God, it sucked. They landed in a recently plowed field. So our area, it wasn't like the Korengal, where the army was in northern Afghanistan. It was all very, a lot of farming, a lot of vegetation, a lot of agricultural,
Mm-hmm.
But so where we landed, it was a plowed field, and so the ground was soft. And anybody who's ran on soft sand on the beach, just it sucks. So, we have all this gear on. None of us can move. We're slow. We're all trying to run, but you can't run with that much gear on. So you're just a slow running target. And so we throw all our gear down, and it's crickets. And we're like, all right, and I remember just little details of I get into I get into the prone, and they have those little what the hell do you call them? Those triggers or not triggers, but the little spiky things.
Yeah.
In the grass. I remember slamming my hand into those. I was like, fuck, I already hate this place. I'm sorry. Can I cuss?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I
It's
should
fine.
have asked.
No, it's a podcast. You can say whatever you want, man.
Yeah, I was just saying, fuck, I already hate this place. And it was just god awful hot. It was 110 degrees out, but nothing's happening. And then, so we landed at 7:05. Probably a good 30 minutes went by, and then it popped off, and we got into a huge gunfight. And not the whole, our whole company hadn't arrived yet. So there was only, I think it was only it was almost like the beginning of, We Were Soldiers, where they only have maybe a platoon plus, or two platoons there, but the whole company or the whole battalion hasn't arrived yet. So it was a little bit like that. So we still had helos coming in, bringing in the rest of the company, so it pops off, we start getting into a firefight. And I'm just completely frustrated because I'm getting shot at, but I do not know where I'm getting shot at from. Everybody's getting shot at, but they're firing at such a great distance that we can't even see them. So I'm not firing anything, but I'm getting shot at, and that is incredibly frustrating for an infantryman.
Were you scared?
There was a moment. The moment I got scared, I wasn't, getting shot at, I was frustrated when I started to get shot at only because I couldn't see them. And I wasn't a type of guy I'm not a spray and pray guy. Some people did do that. I was like, I'm not going to fire my weapon when I don't even know what I'm shooting at. One of my fears, my biggest fear was accidentally hurting an innocent person. So I was not going to just start firing indiscriminately,
Well,
and especially when I couldn't see what I'm shooting at.
To that end, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, James, is simply that, look, once you fire that first round at the enemy,
Yep.
whether it hits or not, you're automatically a different person. And I forget who chronicled it, but God, I wish I could remember. But the person you were before you fired that first round is now dead. You'll never be that person again. You are a different individual, and the responsibility and gravity that comes to that. I remember the first time that I got in a firefight, I actually froze for a split second before I identified the target, froze for a split second, and I'm like, oh shit, if I do this, But then you realize, okay, it's either them or me. I better start pulling the trigger quick, and the thought goes away. But I remember in a split second having that thought of, oh my God, I'm about to fire my weapon.
Right.
And knowing things were going to be different. And it's a moment that I'll never forget. It's seminal. It's crystallizing. It is the date of when you become a different human being.
Yep. God, you sort of hit it so perfectly, because one of the things that I struggled with when I got out of the military was I was like, God, I missed that person that I was on July 1st of 2009, because I was a different person on July 2nd, 2009, and I didn't realize that I was a different person till much later. But the moment I got scared was like really scared, like holy shit, this is really real. Was I was in the prone, and again, still getting shot at, and I'm getting frustrated in terms of like I can't fire back, and I feel like I'm not doing anything, but I'm trying to get positive identification, on sort of where to fight. I was a saw gunner at the time, so I'm carrying an M249 saw, so it was a parasaw, but it's anywhere around 20 pounds, and so me and my team leader, we stand up, and a guy pops out and he shoots an RPG at us. And we dive down, and I could remember it firing at me. I remember it flying over my head because I felt it flying over. And then I remember I turned around, and so we're in sort of like this 360, right? And I remember turning around, and I could see Marines to my rear. And I'm like, oh my God. And it's almost like I watched. It was like I watched the rocket,
RPG,
the munition, I saw it just like in the movies. The only time the most realistic depiction was, I had was from Black Hawk Down. It was absolutely like that. It's like You can just literally watch it. And I remember it came in, and these Marines just happened to move right at, the correct point, and it barely missed them, and exploded, and it blew up the the dirt mound, that they were taking cover at, but they moved just in time. And when it blew up into a dirt mound, throwing dirt and stuff in that, I was like, my first thought was, holy shit, that was like a movie. And then my second shot was, holy fuck, that was really scary. That was the most scared I had been on that day. Because, the bullets, you're hearing the crack. So you're hearing the crack of the rounds, you're hearing all that kind of stuff. But that was something I actually saw. And that was my moment of real, true fear.
Were any casualties sustained that first day?
No. Well, yes, we had tons of guys go down from just absolute heat exhaustion. All the water that we brought with us, we ran out of water real quick. It was it's 110 degrees. We were fighting literally from 7 in the morning. The firefight, it didn't stop until that evening. So around 5 in the afternoon, 6 in the afternoon. It was pretty late. That was the day, Lance Corporal. So we were moving in there's a village near where it was like a marketplace, like a bazaar. And we were moving in to secure that bazaar, which is called the Minapashte Market. Minapashte is on the outskirts of the Garmshire district. And so we're moving in on that, and there's these 2 Marines buddy rushing. And so one was Corporal Tran. He was a team leader. And then the other guy was Lance Corporal Charles Seth Sharp. Sorry. Of Dairesville, Georgia. And they were buddy rushing, and it was Sharp's turn to get up in Buddy Rush, and as he was going up to Buddy Rush, he got shot in the neck by a sniper. He goes down. There's a whole bunch of Marines sort of around him, calling out his name, telling him to, wake up. There's a guy who, sort of yells, we need an 8 and litter team, up to carry him. We had Air Force PJs supporting us that day, and I didn't know what a PJ was. I never, I didn't know much about the military structure at that point, especially in other services. And I remember when Sharp went down, his Marines are basically carrying his sort of lifeless body down the road. He's just bleeding all over the place. And, we call in the Air Force PJs, and these guys are in Blackhawks. And I have a profound admiration for Air Force special operations and what they do, especially the PJs. I mean, these guys, these guys are just phenomenal. I mean, even the pilots, the Black Hawk came in, I remember my squad leader, they came in and I saw this Black Hawk. It went straight vertical and then just landed. And I didn't even know a helicopter could do that. It didn't even, I felt like the rotor blade was going to hit the ground. But they did this just hard combat landing, and these guys in T-shirts, sort of jump out, and they're like, where is he? And the squad leader's like, hey, you guys are getting shot at. And they're like, yeah, we're fine. We got it. We'll just run into hell to grab someone, and especially the Navy corpsmen. It was the first time I really saw what the medical side of the house does and what they will do to get to someone who needs help. Sharp didn't make it, so he died. So he was our first casualty.
Did you know him well?
No, he was in our. But I've thought about him every single day since that day. I didn't know him well, but I know his family really well. I'm good friends with his father. So, I think about him a lot.
You should. I mean, there's no reason not to. It's what we go through and how we survive this is only done together. And for those who didn't make it and didn't come back with us, the only thing we do by honoring them is keep them alive in our hearts and talk about them often and remember how important they were to whatever unit they were in and how much a part of it they were.
Yeah. His death, the reason I know his death so vividly is because I can watch it anytime I want. We had a frontline documentary team with us, and you can watch his entire death on YouTube anytime you want. His death is in the first 5 minutes of a frontline documentary called Obama's War, and then his death is also in a documentary called To Hell and Back Again, which was nominated for an Oscar. I think we lost to a P. Diddy movie.
Oh God!
About high school footballers or a high school football team. But that was the thing is his death is so vivid to me because I can see it, I can watch it anytime, and I have many times. Just to sort of relive those sort of moments. So he dies on July 2nd, and then that night, it was interesting. We're in the prone. It was sort of like nobody really wants to stand up because of so much all the gunfire we were receiving. So it was like, well, we're going to start digging in. So we literally, busted out our e-tools, and I'm in the prone position, digging a 2-man fighting hole in the prone with a e-tool with a shovel. And I remember I laugh about it now because I remember learning about how to dig a 2-man fighting hole in infantry school, thinking to myself, when am I ever going to use this? This is so stupid. I'm like, what are we going to fight in World War I? I remember making fun of it. Like
Right.
I was like, well, we're not going to go fight in World War One. It's like, well, you're going to dig a trench, like. I thought it was more modern. I thought, well, we don't do this. We overwhelm the enemy. It's that sort of thing. We're not going to be sitting in fighting holes. And so I laugh about it because it's like my first day in combat is the thing that I made fun of is exactly what I was doing. So, we went on sort of, we didn't have a base of operations, so it's like, hey, everybody is now on watch. And so we didn't get sleep. Everybody is spent a whole day fighting, and now we're digging 2-man fighting holes, and now we're sitting in fighting holes, and we got to stay awake all night. And there was a couple of guys who fired the weapon because they were so exhausted and they were so deprived of sleep that they shot it like they thought the trees were moving. And so they started shooting at the trees, so, I mean, that's how just exhausted everybody was. And everybody was dehydrated, so it's just, so not even just combat itself. It was all these other elements that were playing a factor,
I mean, this is only day one of this here, James.
This is day one.
Yeah.
This is still day one. Yeah. So, and then the next day it's like, well, we have to move. We have to sort of secure, more. So, nobody got sleep that first night, and then I think the first night I got where the company commander was like, we need to start getting these guys some sleep, or we're gonna burn out, So I think it was right around July 3rd or 4th. It was one of those days, so it was maybe the next day or the day, but it was only for 4 hours, and nobody really got sleep. I remember we pushed into this one house. And it was like, okay, all right, you guys are going to get 4 hours of sleep. And so everybody's like, taking off their gear for the first time, since we landed. And we go to lay down, and EOD does a controlled det, and nobody bothers to tell us.
Oh, God.
So, we're all like scrambling to get our stuff on. And finally someone's like, oh, it was a controlled detonation. So it was just like everybody's on edge.
Welcome to the suck was literally that moment.
Just exhausted. Yeah.
Finally, I get some sleep, and a controlled det thinks we're getting bombed. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. So, we move on from there. I think it's July 4th. I kept a combat diary, so that's why I sort of know I was writing down sort of what we did that day. July 4th or July 5th, somewhere around there. I ran up on a cobra. Scared the hell out of me. I have a incredible fear of snakes.
Really?
Growing up in Florida. Florida. Yeah, growing up in Florida. And one of the back when I was in 3rd Battalion 8th Marines, one of the hazing sessions that occurred, they found out that I had a fear of snakes, and I had a couple senior Marines hold me down. They put a snake on my chest.
Oh, man.
So. No, we were in the tree line, and we had to go clear out these buildings. And between us and the buildings was just nothing. There was no cover. So it's like, if we get caught, running between here and there, we're dead. If some, RPK or some machine gun opens up, So we all get up to run, a good 100 meters, 200 meters, something like that. And this, like when you run, you have to run on line. You can't just sort of zigzag because you're going to cut off the guy next to you's fires if we start getting shot at. So you have to run in a straight line. And I start running, and I'm looking ahead of me. I see this sort of like rope thing, and the rope started to move. And it sort of sprung it sprung up like Indiana Jones. It was like the whole Cobra thing. And I started screaming. And I started pushing to my left to get around the snake, and I pushed into my squad leader. And he's like, the squad leader is thinking a million different things at that point. He's like, what the hell are you doing? I'm like, there's a snake. He's like, I don't give a shit. Keep running. We're trying not to get shot. I don't really give a shit about a snake right now, And then, clearing the buildings. Luckily, I never got into a firefight clearing any of these buildings, thank God, because these buildings are horrible. They're not I don't know how it is in Iraq, but in Afghanistan, they're all mud huts.
Yeah, clay. I mean, there are a lot of clay buildings.
Clay. Yeah, so the door isn't like a regular door frame that we would think of. So you have to like squeeze through, and some of them you have to like duck down. They're not like a regular door frame. And with all that gear, you can get caught on something in the door frame, which every infantryman knows you don't get caught in the fatal frontal, in the door frame. So just clearing our rooms was just, a nightmare, because you couldn't even do a proper room clearing because just the design of the buildings itself, So those are sort of the first days. We eventually we found what used to be a school, and the school was then taken over by the Taliban, and the Taliban then turned it into almost like a recruitment center, and then we took that over, and that is what became what is known as Combat Outpost Sharp.
Okay.
And so we named it after Lance Corporal Sharp.
Gotcha.
And so that was established so we landed on July 2nd, probably around July 5th, July 6th is when we finally found an actual building to then set up operations and start working operations, and that's when, engineers came in, we started, setting up HESCO barriers, and, we had, a dirt sort of landing field, but that's when we started basically, now we have a permanent place of operations. And then from there we started, establishing, OPs and stuff like that.
At any point in time, are you ever thinking, probably should have just went to college like Dad said?
No, I did have the one thought. About, wow, what am I doing here? It was that thought of like, well, I volunteered to be here. I didn't have to come on this deployment. I was with a different unit. That runs through your mind. Absolutely. But then that guilt sets in. It's like, well, why not? Why shouldn't it be me? If it's not me, it'd be someone else. It's that whole idea of like, why do they have to go? It's that, that Saving Private Ryan thing. It's like, why do they have to go? Why do I get to go?
Mm-hmm.
I have to stay here and fight just like anybody else.
Sure.
So you have both of those thoughts, I'm glad you asked that. But that first month of combat, I didn't fire a single round. It was always, I was getting shot at a lot. We had a lot of walk through a lot of IED fields, or where they set up, pipe bombs and stuff like that. And I was getting shot at a lot, but I didn't fire a single round. And until July 31st, 2009 is the first time I fired shots.
Okay.
And that was the first time I ever, that's
first time you ever hit the target.
Hit the target.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were going out on a patrol. It was, before going out on patrol, we were already getting sort of ICOM chatter that, they were watching, and they were setting something up, and ICOM chatter is always very, from the Afghan, not the Afghans, the Taliban, it's always very, like a bunch of bravado and very exaggerated. I remember one time the Taliban said over the radio, "Today will be the day of reckoning," or something like that, and they fired one single round at the base, like a single from like an AK-47 or something. And that was it, So it was like you couldn't take them at their word in terms of like, if they were going to mount a huge attack, it was like, okay, they talked a lot of shit over the radio.
Sure.
And what, I get that. So do we, we talk a lot of shit about the Taliban. So why wouldn't they do it to us, But we're going out on patrol and we're going down the south. We already know there's sort of ICOM chatter. And it's a pretty quiet patrol. And then we had it was it was either RPK or it was a machine gun. That's what they had.
Mm-hmm.
They opened up on us, and it sort of split. So it split our squad in two. In terms of like one squad sort of took cover this way, and one squad, the back half of the squad took cover on the right. And so it sort of split our squad. And so like, okay, we'll attack this from both flanks. We'll sort of move up and almost do team buddy rushes, So my team, we went off to the left, and then there was guys on the right. And so we cleared out this building real quick, and I came to we had one round come in and almost hit my buddy in the face, and we started immediately laughing because he said, "Holy shit, I almost got shot in the face." We all just found that very funny. Which is another thing that I always found sort of interesting about combat is I found myself laughing.
Well, the moments of levity,
scary situations.
Yeah, it's all you have though. It's the only way to relieve, because you don't say I'm scared like I'm just going to crap myself. Like that's not what anybody's going to say.
Right.
The only way to cut the tension is to find a way to make a joke. You know,
right.
I mean, like that's part of the reason why I ask that whole, you know, do you regret doing this, or, you know, do you feel like you should have listened to Dad? Because it's that moment where you go, this is a business decision I made that probably wasn't the best interest of me in the grand scheme of things. But, you know, I mean, you get to chuckle at it because you're okay on the other end.
Right.
But, you know, business decisions, as I air quote the term business decisions, are made all the time in combat. And unfortunately, a lot of them don't work out. I mean, it's just,
right.
You know, if he decides that he's going to set a position 6 inches to the right, that shot doesn't miss his face, he's dead. So,
right. That's
I mean,
exactly right.
It's all you can do with that is just chuckle.
Yeah. Yeah. It always surprised me. I'm like, why am I laughing? Like, I shouldn't be like, but it, you know, it was like, it's exactly right. It's breaking, you know, I know enough about combat now and about the psychological state of what you're going through. And it's like, it's almost your body is reacting naturally.
It's either that, it's either tell a joke or bring up something so mundane that it gets your mind of what's going on. Like I remember when we were lost in Baghdad. We were in the back. Me and another captain were in the back half of this open back Humvee, you know, pulling security as we're driving through, and we were lost, and they were lost, and we started pulling up some areas, and he looks at me, he goes, you know, man, whenever I get nervous, I become Chatty Cathy. I'm like, okay, I can understand that. And he starts asking me, he goes, you know, my wife, you know, she really is stuck on remodeling the kitchen. I'm sitting here thinking, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I'm looking at him quizzically going, this is the conversation you want to have right now? You know, I mean, he just wanted to talk about anything that wasn't, oh shit, we're lost. There's a lot of bad guys standing around us. And the idea of us not coming back is probably more imminent than anything else. But I figured I'd talk about my wife wanting to remodel the kitchen. I mean, that's the only way you cut the moment.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great story.
I mean, at the time, I'm not married, so I don't have kitchens to remodel. So I'm just like,
right, yeah.
What the hell do you want me to do about this? You know?
Like we got, sir, we have sort of a thing going on right now. You might want to save the kitchen remodeling, conversation for later. So round came in, almost hit Minnick in the face. Minnick, unfortunately, he's one of those guys that, you know, it's like he didn't die in combat, but he came home and he was in a ATV accident.
Oh, wow.
And rolled over and he was killed. You know, and it's like I hate those because it's like, man, you got through the worst.
The worst part of it.
Seems to be the worst part, and it's like, you know, so Minnick's no longer here, so I took up, security at sort of looking out this door. You know, it was sort of like a courtyard, and I was looking out this door, and this guy sort of popped around the corner with an AK, and I shot. Started low and worked my way up. You know, because I had a SOG. You know, sort of walked my rounds up on him. Later I really struggled with that first one only because he didn't seem to be, or at least from what I remember, and maybe it's my own memory, but he didn't seem to me to be very old in terms of like, maybe 17, right. 16, and that's sort of, and so in therapy, what I used to, I really felt, that thing that I think World War II people felt, like how did we come to the circumstances in life? How did he get there and how did I get there? Could we have been friends under different circumstances? Sure. I really went through that, and I really.
Let me ask you, James.
It was very interesting.
Let me ask you this, because this perspective is different. I don't mean to cut you off, but and this is just personal experience. I'm somebody like when I would go on the range and you'd do the pop-up targets on the range and you'd watch them fall. Like I'd be talking shit to the targets. Like I'd be cheering myself on out loud. I'm like, see you later, sucker. So when the first time I acquired a target and you hit it and it falls down at a distance, it seems less personal than being able to acquire a face.
Yep.
Do you feel like if you were at a distance where you didn't see the person, you would have felt or reacted differently after?
I think so. I think it was because I could see him.
Yeah, because
I could make out his facial features, and
obviously
absolutely.
the face stays with you. Like you could pick him out of a lineup if he was still alive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just my experience. I never had that close up and personal sort of experience.
Yeah.
Mine were always at a distance. So watching a body fall and watching a target fall to me, I didn't really distinguish the two. You know, it was just like, see you later, sucker. You know, there was nothing personal about it. But when it's that personal, it changes the game.
Right. Well, and actually, to your point, I think you're right because the next time this happened, so that happened was July 31st. I think the next time was around August 13th. I have it written down, but it was like mid-August, and that was at a distance, and it didn't affect me. That first one really affected me, you know, because I could see all that. But also sort of the one thing I wondered was this, I don't know, you go through all the what ifs, was this guy really a Taliban guy or was this guy forced to fight? Because we knew that there were people that were forced to fight. The Taliban made them fight.
Mm-hmm.
And they, even if they didn't want to, was this a guy, who was a farmer? Like I was sort of like, if there was a military invading my country, what would I do? So I ran through all the whole because that part of it I didn't know, because I wasn't working in intelligence or anything. So I didn't know if the guy was a Taliban or a regular person. I just knew it was that moment where like, well, it's either him or my friends or me,
And this is the thing that makes combat so different. I've talked to people on this podcast who had the same experience as you did. They don't think twice about it because for them, it's job, it's function, it's what I'm trained to do. There's nothing personal about it. But there are guys like you and me who process emotions differently, and everything is personal.
Well, in the moment, I didn't think about it in the moment. It was muscle memory. It was just, oh, there he is, fire. All of this sort of came afterward,
Gotcha.
and it came after the deployment. I didn't. I'll jump ahead a little bit, but our platoon, just before we sort of rotated out of the deployment, our platoon sergeant sort of gathered us all together. This is a guy who had been in Fallujah, and at this point we're all like sort of riding high. We're all about to leave, this deployment where at that point we had lost 13 Marines, and what we didn't know is we're going to lose another one, so it'd be 14 Marines that summer. But we're all about to leave, and now we're all, combat veterans or whatever. And he said, what he said was always stuck. I don't remember a lot of what my platoon sergeant said to me, but this is the one thing I do remember. And it was, he said, the hardest part is about to come up. The hardest part of your life is about to happen. And we all were like, we're all E3s, E4s, like, what the hell are you talking about? Like the hardest part, we just did the hardest part. And we didn't understand what he was saying. And what he was saying was the whole coming home from war.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us who are coming home and then getting out of the Marine Corps is what he was talking about. We had no idea. We were all like, you're absolutely out of your mind. The hardest part is over. But it turns out he was absolutely right. The hardest part was not the combat. It was dealing with everything you had done and seen, So jumping back into July 31st, 2009, I took the guy out, and then we called in Cobras. Cobras showed up. They started firing Hellfire rockets, not Hellfires. Maybe it was. I don't remember. I don't remember the armament on a Cobra, but they started firing rockets and machine guns into the building. And as they did, my team sort of egressed to meet to link up with the other team of our squad, and then we sort of egressed back to base. That was July 31st, and then a lot more gunfights and IEDs and stuff like that until October, and then that deployment ended around November. So I think I was home by November 17th.
Wow, only about 4 months.
2009.
Eh? Yeah. Okay. So let me ask you, of the other 13 guys who were killed, anyone stand out to you? Any particular moments?
Yeah. So So we lost 13, and then when we had what was interesting is we had a memorial service when we came back, and then we had a memorial service for the 13 fallen guys, and then like 3 or 4 days later, our 14th would die. Basically, he was wounded in combat. They brought him to Walter Reed, and or either Walter Reed or Germany, I can't remember, but he died at the hospital. Like 4 days after our memorial service, after we got back. So it turned out to be 14 total. Our company, we lost 2 as a company. My platoon did not lose any, fortunately. So all the guys that died, I know a ton about them, but I didn't meet any of them, because I was, I showed up, like 2 or 3 weeks before we deployed. So I didn't go through sort of the training that the other guys went through, where you sort of forge those bonds. But I know tons about them. But I think out of all of them, Sharp is the one who has always been near and dear to my heart, because he's the first guy to die. He was he died on my first day in combat. Our base is named after him, and also I can watch his death anytime I want, if I wanted to. So that one is just very personal for a lot of reasons.
Right.
And jumping ahead, that's when I started to work 10 years later on This Is Us. The character Cassidy Sharp is her last name is named after Lance Corporal Sharp.
Gotcha.
So Sharp has always been very, near and dear to my heart.
Let me ask you, this is your first deployment. I forget which old war philosopher said it. I know Mark Bowden has quoted it several times, but asking any man to go into combat once, it's easy. It's asking him to return back a second time after he's seen the horrors is the real challenge. You've survived this one, but you have another one coming. So how do you handle that, and when is it, and what's that like the second time around?
Yeah, so I came back in 2009, and I immediately, right around this time, I wanted to re-enlist. So I re-enlisted in the, I was a guy who thought he was going to do 20 years in the Marine Corps. So I re-enlisted, and, they were like, hey, do you want to go to, do you want to go to Quantico, or do you want to go to Parris Island? And Quantico is officer land. So I was like, well, I'll go to Paris. I'll go down to Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Parris Island down in South Carolina. And so I PCS'd not long after I got home in 2009, went down to Parris Island. And there I taught recruits how to shoot. So for 2 years, I became a combat marksmanship coach. And then I went through another school and became a combat marksmanship instructor. So I taught coaches how to teach others how to, train people how to shoot. And then I taught recruits myself how to shoot, and would teach. And then, I requalified Marines, on the rifle range. So I did that for 2 years, from 2010 to 2012. And then I had heard a rumor that my battalion was going back to Afghanistan. So I asked, my monitor, hey, I want to go back to my old battalion. I want to go on this deployment. So I went back to 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. At this point, I think I'm like a corporal. Yeah, I'm a corporal. And became a squad leader. I think I was one of, and when I got back to 2-8, most of the guys who were on that 2009 deployment had either rotated to other units or were out of the Marine Corps. So I was one of only maybe a handful of people across the battalion who was on that 2009 deployment, So it was just a new crop of people, So I was an infantry squad leader, had my own squad now as a corporal, but we're also working up for another deployment. Afghanistan at this point is changing. President Obama has already started talking about wanting to end the war in Afghanistan by the end of 2014. So it's different. We're not doing sort of offensive operations anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the Marine Corps is really sort of wanting to expand the what are called company level intelligence cells. They can, we want them to do more, which was an idea born out of Iraq. And so I had gotten certified, and I started going to college in Paris Island, and actually was doing really well in college. I'm a much better college student than I am a high school student.
There's a lack of focus back in high school.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I got certified in Homeland Security from like American Military University, which is like an online university with a focus on counterterrorism. And my company commander had heard about this and was like, we're going to have you lead our company level intelligence cell. And at first I was a little bit upset about it because I had lost my infantry squad, and I'm an infantryman, so to finally get the chance to have an infantry squad is everything, so I was initially upset about it. I was like, I'm not an intel guy, but I actually loved intelligence. Working, going up to the skiff and sort of learning all these things that I would never get to see, as a regular infantryman, and that's when and so I became sort of obsessed because we're going back to Afghanistan, and now I have access to all this information that most people don't have. So I spent hours upon hours upon hours in a skiff learning all I could about Afghanistan, because at that point intelligence drives operations. So my idea is like, well, if I'm going to head up this intelligence team, it's going to be the best team I can think of, So I started working this. I had 3 Marines under me, and we started, working, in the intelligence cell. And so we deployed back to Afghanistan in 2013. We're stationed at Camp Dwyer, which is at southern Afghanistan. But it's different. There's not much going on. I mean, yeah, we're still going out on patrols. I'm jumping on any patrol that I can just to, keep going out, because I would also go out and do tactical questioning and all that kind of stuff. I think we hit 1 IED, but it was a pretty boring sort of deployment. It was. I was working a lot. We ran my office. It was 24-hour operations. Day and night, and I, our battalion. Yeah, I can say this. Our battalion, we had a couple of bad guys in our area, and my whole philosophy was like, well, we're not going to just sit around and collect debriefs from Marines. We're actually going to try to go after these guys, and that's what we did. And that's about as much as I could say about that, but we did, and we got our intelligence cell team led to the killing of I could say this because it's in my battalion commander wrote it in my recommendation form. We killed 1 bad guy. He was a guy who was part of an IED cell, laying in IEDs, that's sort of what I did. But it was a very different deployment than the 2009 deployment.
What's the feeling of? Or what's the difference between being the guy who pulls the trigger and being the guy who provides the information that leads to the guys who get to pull the trigger?
I actually thought that having both gave better perspective.
How so?
Like as an infantryman, I never knew when I was pulling the trigger who that other person was. The great thing about being an intel was, the information I was passing and the information that was collected on some of the guys that we were chasing in Afghanistan, it's like we knew exactly who they were, and I actually found comfort in that. That it wasn't. Mm-hmm. I really didn't. I prefer, because again, I was very worried about I didn't want to hurt anybody who that was an innocent person. I really at that point in my career, I really felt I had a really compassion for the Afghan people. I really felt bad for them. It's one of the most, and this, it's one of the most impoverished countries, mm-hmm. The life expectancy for an Afghan child is 5 years old, and that's still true today. Usually they have brutal winters, and there's just such a lack of food, and they're growing, poppy and turning it into heroin, and it's just a hard life. And I really felt bad for them, and then I felt even more bad for the Afghan people because they were caught between two opposing forces, the Taliban and us. And it's just a horrible way to be brought up, and all these children know nothing but violence.
Sure, yeah.
So I always felt bad. So I actually loved knowing that, the guys that we were going after were actually bad guys. Like I could like this is what they're doing, It wasn't I didn't have that question of like, were they forced to fight? What are their individual circumstances? Like, that was all taken away. So it was actually comfort in knowing, the hardest thing I had on that deployment was, I'd watched, and we talked a little bit about, having a flashback or anxiety. Hardest thing on that 2013 deployment was actually something I watched. I had, it is a static camera, a G-Boss, and it's aimed down, sort of like a corridor. And there is this 5-year-old Afghan child who ran into frame, and they ran out of frame. And the child, this 5-year-old boy, or he was about 5 or 6, somewhere around there. He realized that when he ran across the first time, that he had stepped on a soft spot, and all kids of that age are just curious about life. I have a 4-year-old, and it's just amazing me about how many things questions that he asks, and he is so curious about life. And so this kid wanders back into frame and goes to the middle frame, and he notices he stepped on something. And so he starts stepping on it again and starts stepping on it. And I know what's going to happen. He's stepping on an IED, and he keeps stepping on it and nothing is happening. I didn't realize till later that the reason why the IED is not going off is because he's too malnourished, which is almost, to me, it's almost even more insidious than the IED. Yeah. That this kid doesn't even weigh enough to set off a bomb, which is just its own sort of thing. But he keeps stepping on it because he's just curious. And then he sort of takes his whole body weight and throws himself onto it, and he disappears. And so that was 2013. Skip to about 2 years ago, or no, maybe about a year ago. My kid was 3 years old. He just turned 4. My kid loves the Lumineers. There's a song by the Lumineers called Ho Hey. Mm-hmm. And so he loves jumping up and down to it. And I was in the kitchen, and I was just watching him dance. I was very, I was a proud father just watching him dance and have fun, And he started jumping up and down, and just the way he was jumping up and down, I got transported back to that kid.
Yep.
Jumping on the IED. And it was the weirdest thing because I never would have connected those two things. I never would have, because I was actually genuinely just in a moment of sheer happiness of watching my kid jump around to this song. And I never would have associated that with the way he was jumping around with the way this kid jumped on an IED, not knowing that it was an IED.
Did your heart sink? Did you skip a beat?
Oh yeah. I had to walk out of the room. It was one of those, and actually that's something that that's what became part of the storyline in this season of This Is Us when I started working on the TV show. I told them about, we all sort of know the regular sort of traumatic triggers in terms of like fireworks going off or a car backfiring,
Mm-hmm.
but it's these ones that come out of like left field where you would just never think that this would even be remotely related or would even remotely connect to some sort of traumatic experience. Like it just crushed me, you know. And so in This Is Us, in the first episode, the show I work on, for her it was an IED, a drone strike sort of went bad, and there were some civilians killed in it. And you know this from Iraq because it was done in Iraq and Afghanistan, is that we give out condolence payments.
Yeah.
Which are called CERT payments, commanders, something. But yeah, we give out condolence payments when we accidentally kill someone, or maybe we accidentally kill their donkey or something like that. And I knew of a story from 1-6 where they were in a firefight. They accidentally hit a house where Afghans were taking shelter. A woman and her 3 kids, they were killed. And so the next day they went and paid condolence payments, and it equaled to about, it was about $1,200 a person. So in This Is Us, she comes home, she's out of the Marine Corps, and her husband says, our hot water heater broke again. It's going to cost about $1,200 to fix it. And that's the trigger for her, that the water heater costs more than what she paid for someone in Afghanistan's life. So that's what became the storyline. But that was born out of that experience that I had in my kitchen, where the trigger was something that you would never
very
sort
inane.
of relate.
Yeah,
it was just out of left field. And I'm talking to other veterans. Those ones tend to be very impactful. Everybody knows sort of the 4th of July ones, or the car backfiring, but it's these ones that are just, like, why would that make me think of this very horrible moment, So that was sort of the rough thing on the 2013 one. So I came home from 2013 Afghanistan, and I'm trying to re-enlist again because, again, my whole idea is I want to stay in for 20 years. And but at that point, the military is drawing down. We're trying to end the war in Afghanistan. Officially, the Iraq war is over in terms of combat operations.
Yeah, I was there for the end of it.
Yeah. So anytime there is war is ending, there are massive layoffs. For lack of, I mean, that's what they are.
War is the biggest business in America. Always has been.
That's right. So I got laid off. They were. I fell into a horrible fiscal year in terms of like how many personnel the Marine Corps could keep in a specific MOS, and they were like, well, "Thanks for your service, but you need to get out." And I didn't do anything wrong. I was an expert rifleman and always had a first class PFT, and never got in any trouble. No NJPs or anything. It was just one of those, like, it was a numbers game, and so they're like, it's time for you to get out. And so I had about a month. So I was in that limbo period where I didn't know, like, are they going to accept my reenlistment or not? And by the time I got told that I had to get out, it was only about a month. So I had a month to figure out what the hell I was going to do with my life, and also check out of the Marine Corps completely. The thing that I've been doing for the past 8 years.
Right.
So that was just, an issue in itself. How am I going to sort of provide, for myself and my family, and how am I going to, what the hell am I going to do? I thought I was going to be doing this for 20 years. It was sort of the only thing I wanted to do. And so I started going to college. So I got out and I enrolled in classes at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, which is about an hour and a half drive from Jacksonville, North Carolina, which is where Camp Lejeune is. And so I started going to classes, and in intelligence, you do a lot of writing. And so at that point, I was a very good writer. And so I thought, well, maybe I can just do journalism. The whole idea behind journalism was I wasn't at that point ready to deal with my own experiences from war, and I wasn't ready to talk about them or even write them down on paper to even share with the public. So I was like, well, I can write about other people. And I'll write about other people's experiences, sort of like what you're doing. I'll just hear about what other people have been through and what their experiences are like, and maybe through that it'll be therapeutic for me. It was good initiative, but poor judgment. It was not therapeutic. I found myself taking on a lot of their suffering. Um, you know, um, when I first went into journalism, I covered a lot of post-traumatic stress, what was being done in Congress, legislation wise, what was being done in sort of the medical side of the house, that sort of thing. But I essentially just worked for free for a long time, and my whole idea behind that was, I'm sort of building a new career. So I started freelancing. I freelanced for the Washington Post, and I freelanced for a couple other smaller sites, and I freelanced for the Daily Beast. But still not making a lot of money and still going to college. I was an Uber driver while in college. So I was driving around kids on like a Saturday night. Wilmington, North Carolina is a college town. So, you can make a good bit of money on a Friday or Saturday night just driving kids around to different parties. So I was an Uber driver and doing this freelance journalism thing and going to college and, raising a family. But also dealing with my own stuff, and and anybody who's going through depression or dealing with trauma, it's hard when you still are dealing with stress. You tend to gain a lot of weight. I gained weight, and that plays on your self-esteem and your self-image because you're no longer this Marine anymore. You're now a guy who can't even run a mile down the road. And it's that, for me, it was that thing that I think all service members and veterans struggle with when they come out. It's, what is my purpose?
Yep.
I had lost my purpose. I'd really, truly lost it. And at that point, my purpose was always, the purpose in the military it was like, I'm always serving this thing that is greater than myself. Or I didn't really buy into the idea that I'm defending the country, but I felt that I was at least serving the American people and serving, them. That's how I sort of looked at it.
Well, and also you were doing it so they didn't have to. That's
right. And so, but I had lost that. And so the problem with, I have no offense against Uber drivers. They work very hard, and I actually enjoyed it because I got to talk to people, but it didn't give me that sort of thing, that purpose and drive that I was working towards something bigger than myself. And also I didn't get that sense of like, oh, I'm doing something good. I'm doing a good in terms of the community or society, And that's sort of what was the other attraction about journalism is like, I can keep people informed. I can let people know, people who don't know anything about the military, maybe I can provide some sort of understanding to them about the military, But, so I started to look at journalism as almost an extension of my military service, where I felt like I was still serving sort of a higher purpose, and keeping people informed, and this is before the age of fake news and everybody sort of hating reporters.
Yeah.
but that's how I looked at it was, I'll tell these stories that are not being told.
Well,
That's why I really appreciate what you're doing with this podcast is like,
well, thank you.
Like, this is really, because this is, these are the sort of stories that get missed. War is not just one anything, and so that what sort of gave me my purpose. And I was a freelancer for a good 4 years before I got hired. And I covered everything from PTSD. I covered a couple of movies, I covered, I got to talk to, like World War II veterans, I covered the Parkland shooting. I happened to be living in Parkland, Florida.
Oh, wow.
About 3 miles from the high school when the Parkland shooting happened. So I covered the Parkland shooting. The New York Times profile is when, I covered the Marines United scandal within the Marine Corps. And then last year, July, what's interesting is I got hired by Newsweek, and my first day was July 2nd of 2018. So literally 9 years to the day since my first day in combat. And then I started working for This Is Us this past January, and I still work for the show, crafting this sort of veteran storyline for season 4 of This Is Us. And what's interesting is we're filming these Afghan scenes in July of 2019, 10 years to when I was my first day in combat.
It's all cyclical, yeah.
It was a very surreal sort of connections, these little sort of connections.
Well, to your point, James, and you kind of highlighted on it, but let me try to encapsulate it. What you do and what we do here on the Hazard Ground, as far as the stories that we tell, the coverage of combat is so disproportionate to what it is. It's similar in sports, right? Like, we'll talk more about the Hall of Fame careers that make up less than 1% of the people who play a sport. Just the way we only talk about the Medal of Honor winners and the stories of heroism and everything else. That is less than 1% of the people who actually go to combat and do something. But yet we spend so much time and energy on those and leave out the other 99%. And the hope is that by telling some of these stories, we give some more value, not necessarily value, I don't know if it's the right word, but we give some more attention to the 99% and more affection and more notoriety to it that's constantly being overlooked.
Right. No, that's absolutely right. Like I said, it is, the thing about war, one battle can have 50 to 100 different perspectives.
Absolutely.
On who saw what,
yes.
Firefights are incredibly difficult to piece back together in terms of what happened when, so absolutely. That's why it's important to sort of talk to, all levels, because, the one thing that, as much as I've interviewed a couple generals and admirals and stuff, but the further you are from the lowest rank, the further you are from combat.
Yeah, I struggle with that. I just completed battalion command, and I reflected in my change of command speech how my lone regret is that I didn't spend more time with the soldiers. And in certain cases, you can't. You just have to work a level above you.
So busy.
You're constantly looking up and working, at problems at that level that your attention is taken away. And the worst thing a leader can be is remove from Jimmy and Joe and Jane down on the front line. It's the worst attribute you can happen, and you get sucked in, and it happens, and I understand why. But I think the best leaders in our military constantly are being drawn down to where the rubber meets the road, because that really will give you the best sense of what the unit needs are.
Right. Well, there's that whole idea in the military right now where you have this sort of leadership through email. And a lot of leaders like yourself are, it's like you cannot lead through email.
No, you got to be present.
Get out of your offices.
Yep.
I know it, and it's like, I know it's hard, and everybody is sort of bombarded with emails and just bombarded with work, but it's like you got to force yourself to get out of the office to effectively lead. You can't do it from there, And that's, for me, it's like, I work out of an office as a journalist, but I feel the same thing. Like, I'm removed from the troops. I need to, that's why, most journalists want, and we push to go on embeds with the troops, because for the same reasons. It's like we're removed from the ground truth, that ground information, of like, what are the needs for, the lowest private. Are those needs being met, or are they not being met? That sort of thing. So as journalists, it's almost the same thing. Syria has been popping off the last 2 weeks. I've looked a couple times. Is there a way I can get to Syria? To see how, because that's where our troops are.
Right.
I've been wanting to do an embed in Afghanistan for a while, but they don't do embeds in Afghanistan anymore. Embeds were huge during the Iraq War. And I think that
I know it.
But that was to the betterment of the unit.
Yeah, it was, but a New York Times writer almost got us killed.
Well, yeah, that does happen. Yeah, not all journalists are
And let me rephrase: going to get a New York Times writer from the Green Zone almost got us killed.
Oh, really?
The only reason we were making the trip was to pick up the New York Times writer, and we landed. We rolled over an IED and everything else, and it was it was a bad day. He got a great story out of it. I mean, he got a fantastic story out of it. But for me, I was 8 days from leaving country, and I didn't want to die 8 days before leaving country. So
exactly.
It wasn't one of my favorite days there, to say the least. But
no, absolutely. There's a situation I know of with Newsweek where Major Megan McClung. I think if I'm not mistaken, I think she's like the first woman, female officer, to die in Iraq. If I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure, but basically she had just gotten back. She had dropped off like.
You are correct. She was the first female Marine to be killed in combat.
Yeah, she dropped off Oliver North and his Fox News team, and they were going. Newsweek was preparing to go out, and she took the place of her gunnery sergeant. She was like, "I'll take him out. I got it." Right, and so she gets in the Humvee and replaces, the Marine below her, and they're taking Newsweek out to show them, around Iraq or whatever, and they hit an IED and she was killed.
Oh God.
Yeah. So it was, it was one of those sort of things, but just shows you the sort of the bravery of our men and women in service, and then the bravery of journalists just to bring news to the American people, and unfortunately it doesn't always work out. Mm-hmm. The news is sort of the violence of the day. Yeah,
well, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Let me ask you an anecdotal question or an anecdotal story. You've talked about This Is Us, and I think the work there is fantastic. But as a former Marine, you would think that you would be welcome on any Marine base in America. But as I've read, that is currently not the case. You are not welcome at Camp Lejeune.
I am. Yeah, that is true. So I am. I'm permanently banned from stepping foot onto Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune after I served. After serving there honorably, I was honorably discharged. I don't have a court martial. I don't have an NJP. I never got in trouble. But yeah, I can't step foot on Camp Lejeune. What that was in. When I was at Parris Island, I had a commanding officer. His name was Colonel Dan Wilson. Dan Wilson was a Mustang Marine. He is, he had worked all the way up to staff sergeant, then went to college, got his degree, and, now he's a full bird colonel. And, I think he had like 36 years at that point. But he was for a guy that was 6'2", 6'3", and about 200 pounds, very hospitable. Very someone who you never felt that you were being looked down upon, regardless of what your rank was. He was a sort of a commanding officer that would go around and learn everybody's name. Like that was sort of his first priority. I want to know everybody's name in my battalion. Very personal, and would give his cell phone number to anybody in the battalion. And to me, I had never had a commanding officer like that. Especially someone who was also from the infantry, and so I sort of, in that my time in Parris Island at 2010, 2012, this guy was Jesus to me. I really I would tell people that's the kind of Marine I want to be, in terms of him as a Marine officer and how he led. I get out of the Marine Corps. I stay in touch with him. I'm freelancing for the Washington Post at this point and the Daily Beast. And I get a press release that comes out from Camp Lejeune. And he has been charged with sexually assaulting a 6-year-old.
Oh, Jesus.
And my whole world was like, what the hell? Like what is this about? Like it came out of nowhere, because at that point he was the chief of staff for 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune. And so, I'm like, what? I'm just sort of dumbfounded, And so he's not put in pretrial confinement. So I meet with him at Mission Barbecue, and we have a meeting, and I'm like, I'm like, what is going on, And he's at this point he's got a severe alcohol problem, and he's going through a withdrawal, so his hands are shaking. He doesn't look good, And I'm like, is any of this true? And he's like, no, he denies it. He denies the story. Absolutely, that it's not true. And I was like, okay, so walk me through the story. And so he's telling the story, and the story to me, it's like, I had that sort of spidey sense go up, like there's something's not adding up, like there's something not jiving in terms of how he's telling the story. And so I go back and I'm wrestling, like, is there is this something I should look into as a journalist? Do I have too much of a bias in terms of my past experience with him? If I did a story, would it, it would just paint him it wouldn't be fair to the story. Like it would, it would be, it would paint him in a good light, because, he was my commanding officer at one point. Was there this sort of conflict of interest? But also, so that was running through my head. And then also it's like, I'm the only one who sort of knows all the players in this story. I'm out of the Marine Corps, but I'm still living in Jacksonville, North Carolina. And so I made the decision that what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my professor who actually taught me journalism. And I'm going to bring them in on we're going to do a story. And I'm going to bring him in, and we're going to look into this. And my professor will be there to check me on any biases that I have, any perceived, what I'm saying?
Makes sense, yeah.
For this conflict of interest. But it's like, this is something that needs to be looked into. I mean, this is a guy, again, 36 years in the Marine Corps, So we spend the next 9 months investigating this story, and we collected a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, we got NCIS and interrogation tapes. We got thousands of text messages. We got a whole bunch of stuff. The Marine Corps didn't know we were looking into this story. The way the military works in terms of journalism is, anytime you want to interview someone for the military, you have to go through public affairs. And up until that point, I'd always gone through public affairs. The problem with this story is both the victims in the story and Colonel Wilson and his camp, they both camps agreed on two things, and they didn't even know they agreed on two things. One was there was a huge distrust of NCIS, and then the other was there was a huge distrust of public affairs, that public affairs was going to attempt to sweep this under the rug. And so it was like, okay, there's a huge distrust of public affairs from both sides. If I go through public affairs, one, they're going to say they're not going to give me an interview. And two, if by some wild chance that they give me an interview with either party, they're not the interviewee is not going to be forthcoming, because there's this person in the room that they don't trust.
Sure. Go ahead.
So I didn't go through public affairs. I interviewed Colonel Wilson. I interviewed all the victims. We interviewed everybody several times, over the course of our 9-month investigation. But the Marine Corps found out. So they didn't like that I skirted public affairs. And then Colonel Wilson, about 2 or 3 months after he was charged with sexually assaulting a 6-year-old, he was charged again with alleged sexual assault on a 49-year-old. Those charges were dropped at trial. But once he was charged with that, he was put into pretrial confinement. And so I went and visited him at the brig. The Marine Corps didn't like that, so they banned me. They banned me from base permanently. I thought it was going to be sort of, like a 6-month sort of thing, but they permanently banned me. I got to get around to appealing it one day.
I got to get around to it.
Yeah, well, I don't live in Jacksonville, North Carolina anymore, and it doesn't really affect my coverage. So it's like, You know what I'm saying? Like me
Sure,
not having
yeah.
access to a base doesn't really, the only thing that bothered me about being banned is, in their banning of me, they said that I was a security risk, which was absolutely ridiculous. But the thing that really bothered me was the memorial to the guys that we lost in 2009 is at 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. And every year on July 2nd, I would buy 14 roses, yellow roses, and I'd go to the memorial even after I got out, and I would put them on the memorial and just spend some time at the memorial at the battalion. So once I got banned, I wasn't able to do that. That was the one thing that really bothered.
Yeah.
That was the one thing that really bothered me about it. But anyways, we investigated it for 9 months. He was convicted by a jury of 4 general officers and 5 colonels, I think. He was given 5.5 years in prison. And then our story dropped the day after he was convicted.
That's it? He only got 5.5 years?
Yeah. Skip to this year, the appellant courts overturned the conviction.
Really?
Yeah. So what a lot of people don't know about...
he was tried in the military court, obviously, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So, and one of the issues was he had such seniority, even as a colonel, 36 years in. It was hard to find general officers and colonels who were both, had availability and, was a peer. You know what I'm saying? So even like jury selection was a little bit difficult. But the main difference, what a lot of people don't know about the differences between civilian court and military court is in civilian court, the way you have court cases overturned is that there has to be sort of a misstep in the judicial process where not all the rights were afforded to you under the law, right? Mm-hmm. That distinction does not exist in the military. In the military, the appellant courts can overturn a conviction simply because they don't like it. There doesn't have to be, or they feel that the evidence wasn't sufficient, evaluated properly. Yeah. There doesn't have to be a judicial misstep. So earlier this year, 3 judges on the appellate courts who are all, I think they're either lieutenant commanders or commanders, because so they're all 05s. Overturned the guilty conviction that was decided by 4 generals and 5 colonels. So his conviction was overturned.
Stuff like that burns me up, man.
So he does have some additional pending charges for conduct unbecoming and some behavioral things that happened when he was stationed in Okinawa. He actually got kicked out of Okinawa. Excuse me, not Okinawa. He got kicked out of. He was stationed in Okinawa and was sent down to Australia to be a liaison in Australia, and got kicked out 10 days later for conduct that was not becoming.
Gotcha.
And what is perceived as sexual harassment. So those charges are still pending, and so we're still sort of waiting. Are those charges going to go? Because the appellate courts decided that he has to be retried. So it's like, is the convening authority at Camp Lejeune going to, hold another hearing based on the Okinawa stuff, or are they just going to drop it and let this guy get out of the military? So but that's the whole reason why I can't.
Well, you're banned from Camp Lejeune. Gotcha.
Yeah. So it's not just I was doing something stupid. There was actually a legitimate reason.
Let me kind of put a bow on some of this. I mean, you're an award-winning journalist. You've covered things all over the world and all over the country, specifically military-related Department of Defense. When you write about the military now, and you write about where we are, and I know this is a broad question, but are you disenfranchised? Do you feel good about the military and where we are, or are we kind of in a place now that we're only there because of 20 years of war, or we're there because we're lacking in values? I mean, how do you, and it goes back to that separating sort of your bias, how do you separate yourself from the journalist from the former Marine?
Right. So I'm still a person who believes in service to country. That is, anybody who wants to go in the military, I still support that. I'm not sort of like, I'm not an anti-war sort of person. I would prefer us not to go to war. But I'm not the person who would look down upon anybody who wants to go serve, because there is still that part of me where they gave me the opportunity, I'd probably go back in the uniform tomorrow. There is that part of me, and I can't deny that. But I'm no longer a bright-eyed private and just sort of ignorant of the world. You can't unsee what you've seen. Through my experiences in Afghanistan and working in the intelligence community and working, for the past 4 or 5 years as a journalist, the curtain gets drawn back, and you see, the man behind the curtain, in Wizard of Oz, and you can't unsee that. So, so anytime I'm reporting on a story now, it always for me starts at the ground level. What are the troops on the ground? How do they feel about it? And how are policies being translated down to them from the top level? And there's no other story that I have to check my biases more on than Afghanistan, because of my experiences there, and it's so personal. And it's the hardest for a lot of reasons. It's the hardest because it's our longest war. It's longest because a lot of the rhetoric that still is used today has been used for years, regardless of political party. The whole, we're all sort of familiar with we're turning a corner in Afghanistan, or we're making progress in Afghanistan. We're all sort of familiar with that. We were all familiar with presidents coming in saying they're going to withdraw, and no withdrawal happens. So it's the one story where I have to remain as unbiased and objective as possible, and I really have to keep my own experiences in check. And that's where I really have to rely on my fellow reporters and even my editors at Newsweek, because it's not just a story; it's very personal.
As it should be.
The reason why, and usually, it's the story that I despise the most is the story that I have to do every single time, is when a new KIA comes in.
Yeah.
It destroys me. It really does. I lose sleep over it. I don't get to sleep that night. Because usually what happens is I'll find out who, just because I have good sort of sourcing, I'll find out who it is way before the Defense Department even announces that there is another KIA. And so I'll have the name, and I'll have what unit they are, and all that kind of stuff. And I never, it's a personal policy. I have 2 personal policies. One, I will never publish before the Defense Department does, because I have a fear that the family member is going to learn about the death of one of their loved ones from my news story versus the Defense Department. So I never publish before the Defense Department does. That's my own personal policy. My other personal policy is when there is a KIA, I never will reach out to the family. The last thing they need is a reporter reaching out for a comment or a quote when they've just been given the worst news of their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not
all reporters believe in that. A lot of editors don't believe in that. They're like, if someone is killed, you go get that quote. You go get that, you go get that soundbite or whatever from the family. Leave them alone. It can wait. You don't need it. You can still tell the story without, asking the dumb question of, how do you feel right now? How do you think they feel? Their life has just been destroyed, So I don't reach out to the family. I'll try to find maybe a friend, of the family or something like that, but I never reach out to the immediate family, because they don't need to hear from me as a reporter. They gotta, they've just been handed the most devastating news. So those are my personal sort of things. But the reason those stories kill me is because I almost feel like, that I'm writing an obituary, and I'm not writing just a regular story. And so I spend a ton of time going through their Facebooks and to try to get a sense of who they were, so I can write a little bit more about the person than just, oh, this is another person that died today, So I can just sort of, this is who they were when they were not in war. This is what they did
Right.
as a father or as a mother.
Provide some depth and context.
You know what I'm saying? Besides just, because that's what, I did a story on, and actually I won an award for this. When Ryan Owens was killed, Ryan Owens was a SEAL Team 6 member. He's the first service member to die under President Trump. So he died in January of 2017. But what was interesting is that you didn't know, the story was just that he was the first person killed under President Trump, and he became sort of a political footnote in terms of whether or not you agreed or disagreed with President Trump's policies. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So the person themselves became missing in their own death. And that really bothered me. And so I spent months trying to convince his family and his brother, please let me do a story about him. I don't care. It's not a political story. I just want to know who he is. And I finally convinced his brother to talk to me. His brother is also a Navy SEAL. And what I learned was when he died, his brother was overseas as well, doing things. And he actually flew with his brother in a coffin on the C-17 flight back to Dover.
Very similar to Pat Tillman and Richard Tillman.
That's right. Yeah.
Or Kevin Tillman, rather.
And I can only imagine flying with your own, your own flesh and blood on that flight back. They're both Navy. Ryan was a Navy SEAL, and his brother John is a former Navy SEAL. And so the story was just about who Ryan was as a person. Inside the military and outside the military. So those stories really kill me. And that's when, and those are the stories that I think about anytime I'm asking some sort of admiral or general about what are we doing in Afghanistan, or a politician. It always starts with the death toll, because that's the result of any policy or any strategic plan or any military plan. That's the consequence, and so it's those stories that I really have to check my bias on more than anything.
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah. I mean, James, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed the conversation. I think this is our longest podcast to date, as far as length is concerned. I mean, I could talk. No, not at all. I mean, listen, it's flown by. I could talk to you for hours more. I've got 1,000 more questions just about media and covering this and all the other stuff. And of course, what the chaos in Washington that is. I mean, I'm sure we could talk for hours more, but certainly your particular story, you tell it with passion, you tell it with love, and it obviously still is a part of the fabric of who you are and the work that you do on a daily basis. But I just can't thank you enough for, being so open and honest with us and really just, doing what you do well, and that's tell a great story.
I really appreciate you listening and doing this for not just me, but for other veterans. I mean, it's really, like I said, it's in many ways, it's like you're an historian. And, I just think about all the stories that we have not heard because the veteran hasn't gotten the opportunity to tell it, or two, they're no longer with us. So I really appreciate the opportunity that you've let me just sort of openly speak. And hopefully I didn't take up too many. Hopefully this didn't get too dark or too boring.
No, not at all. We've hit every range of emotions possible on this podcast in one way or another. And thank you for a very high compliment. The fact that we are chronicling history is something that we don't talk about enough, or we don't even give enough credence to. But it's essentially what we do, and you're a big part of that, and your story is part of that. So, James LaPorta, thank you for everything, and thank you for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.